It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from RossTucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' Podcast presented by DraftKings, the greatest app of all time. They will have their best ball up soon. You know all about DraftKings DFS. And if you are in a legal state, get that sportsbook app on your phone. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years, bunch of media gigs, bunch of podcasts. We'll be 42 years old next week, have still yet to have a real job in my existence as a human being, trying to keep that going as long as I possibly can. Right now, I'm wearing mesh shorts, a t-shirt. I don't even have anything on my feet, flip-flops, but I'm not even having the flip-flops on. And I'm just sitting here talking with you and eventually Joe Dolan and Scott Barrett about fantasy football. This is amazing. Please check me out on social media at RossTucker NFL. We are at RossTucker Pod. So Twitter and Instagram, that's the show handle. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the whole deal. You can always watch every episode of all of our shows, Even Money, where yesterday we got into the NFL futures. And I thought Steve Fezzik had some tremendous advice in terms of betting the NFL draft and which NFL futures you should strongly consider and which ones you should absolutely stay away from on the Even Money podcast. Ross Tucker Football Podcast, of course, Andrew Brandt was not messing around when it came to Carson Wentz and Big Ben today. Make sure you check out that. College Draft Podcast was awesome. Tomorrow we'll have Greg Cosell on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast talking running backs. Today, we are talking best ball fantasy football again. 2 weeks in a row. Last week was Fantasy Football Best Ball 101. This week, we're stepping it up a notch. We're going to 201. Yes, I've got Joe Dolan with me. As always, check him out on Twitter at FG_Dolan, my number one co-host, my normal co-host. But today we brought in the big guns, okay? I am told by Joe Dolan, the number one ranked fantasy analyst, according to fantasypros.com, that Scott Barrett is the Greek god of best ball fantasy football. That is what I've been told. You ever see Almost Famous where the guy jumps off the roof? He's like, I'm a Greek god. That is what Scott Barrett does when he jumps into different best ball drafts. He jumps off the roof into the pool and says, I'm a Greek god. Hello, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing great. I wasn't expecting, such a wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. Thanks so much. I will say the preeminent best ball guru from an analyst perspective has to be Mike Beers over at RotoViz, but we're good friends and we talk best ball all the time. I talked best ball on the phone with him for about an hour yesterday. And then the best ball GOAT in terms of actually playing best ball is a guy named Aaron H. No one knows his last name. I do. No one's ever talked to him. I've talked to him, but he plays he enters over 1,000 best ball drafts across various sites. And, anything over a 10% win rate returns a profit. Anything over a 15% win rate is potentially unsustainable. And this guy just wins 40% of every best ball league he enters. So if I'm the Greek god of best ball, it's definitely because, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here. But thanks again for that introduction.
So Joe and Scott are both rock stars at fantasypoints.com. We love fantasypoints.com. We encourage you to sign up and get a subscription using the code FEAST at fantasypoints.com. Joe is rocking an awesome Clemson hat today, which makes sense because your wife works there, correct, Joe?
She is a assistant professor of sports communication. I have to throw in the assistant there because the academics, let me tell you, you're not a professor until you get tenure. So I have to. We're waiting for the tenure. There's always something to work towards. By the way, it was the obviously the bachelor's degree, which I decided was enough for me, and then the master's, and then the PhD, and now you have the PhD. You got a job. Oh, but wait a minute. You're not yet a professor. You're an assistant professor. You need tenure in order to become full professor. So
what do you need for that, Joe? How many years you need for that?
It's mostly based on publications. So it's a different number of publications. It probably is going to take at least 5 years. But hey, I get this nice swag. Of course, I had to pay for this. I'm not Dabo. You know, Dabo gets his stuff for free. Maybe I should send it. Maybe Dabo plays best ball. I don't know. I mean, there's plenty.
You know what? He would probably do pretty well just drafting his own former players.
No, how about
Scott,
that?
I know I've asked this before when we had you on last year because I noticed it last year. You got to tell me about the Matt Jones. That's Kyle Orton. You know what? The way you have the picture covered by your avatar, I thought that was like JP Lossman for a second, who I played with. And then I just looked closer. I saw the jersey number. I'm like, I don't remember Kyle Orton playing for the Bills, by the way. But I'm looking at Scott Barrett DFB. I thought that was my former teammate, JP Lossman. I was about to say a lot of bad things about him. I'm glad it's not him.
Yeah, I just love Kyle Orton because of that, 2014 season with the Bills. He was retired. His head coach, Doug Marrone, just begged him off of a bar stool to come back to play halfway through the season. And he almost led them back to the playoffs. And, every post-draft, post-game press conference was wearing a leisure suit and had this mustache where he looked like down on the luck, twice divorced, small town detective with a drinking problem. And then Matt Jones is just everyone knows, a legend, the most athletic wide receivers of all time by speed score are Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, Matt Jones, DK Metcalf, and then no one else comes close. So, and he was just so fun to watch in college with another glorious mustache. So, shout out to both of those guys, my NFL spirit animals.
All right, so Scott, let's start with this. Best ball is my favorite fantasy football format. Joe and I hit it pretty hard last week. We kind of did fantasy football, best ball 101. I don't know why I keep saying fantasy football. It's just best ball 101. But my question for you is, obviously you're a big fan too. So part of what we're doing is trying to encourage more people to go ahead and give best ball a try at DraftKings when they post it, hopefully soon. Why do you love best ball, Scott?
Oh, it's just the best. It's, super low maintenance, super addicting. I like to, to me, it's sort of like a mock draft where you could win money. And everyone loves drafting. Drafting's the best part. My least favorite part is, making waiver claims and dropping players and, who do I start? Who do I sit? It's so hard to get that right all the time. And then you beat yourself up. So just throw all of those out. And you could do in a draft, you could do a slow draft, you could do a fast draft, slow draft, 6 hours per pick. You could do 15 drafts at once, which I've done. And it's all a lot of fun. And the best part I think about best ball is it's a game within a game where just knowing the right number of positions to pick can bump up your odds to 10.5% or 15%. On FFPC, just drafting exactly 3 kickers and 3 defenses bumps your win rate up to 10%, and then 2 of each or 4 of each drops it down below the league average, below the expected win rate, which is 1 out of 12. And so 10% again is enough to profit. So just doing this one small minor thing that most other people don't do, and it's just really easy to do. It's you're going into the game, as Beers would say, with a 10-point lead, just doing nothing. It's just so easy to do. So just compounding small edges like that can really bump up your win rate. And it's something I've been very successful profiting in. And that's not even including drafting the right players, which is another thing as well.
Okay, so that is really interesting. And Joe, you got the next question, but I gotta follow up on what Scott just said. So tell me that stat again. If you draft 3 kickers and 3 defenses out of like your 20 picks, that increases your odds. Say that again.
So yeah, on FFPC, so there's a number of different sites. We have a partnership with FanBall, BestBall 10s, but on FFPC, Mike Beers, his data is showing that if you draft exactly 3 kickers and 3 defenses, your win rate improves to 10%. That includes all leagues ever drafted over a pretty robust sample size, includes like dummies who drafted a quarterback in the first round or a defense in the 9th round. 10%, enough to profit. And then exactly 2 or exactly 4, you're below 8%. So a below average expectation, below 1 out of 12. So just like a small, something most other people aren't thinking about can go a really long way towards maximizing your chance of winning.
Now, Scott, obviously, like I think the edge there, just to put an anecdotal spin on it, is people don't think they need to draft more than 2 kickers or 2 defenses. A, it's boring to draft them. B, if you draft 3 defenses, you're like, well, why do I draft more than 2? Because defenses are unlike other positions in that they're always going to be out there for you. They might lose a player to injury, but the defense is always going to rack up points for you any given week. So anecdotally, that makes sense to me. Now, I want to shift focus, though, to a site like DraftKings, where kickers and defenses are not part of the equation. There are no kickers and defenses on DraftKings Best Ball. It's full PPR. What kind of roster construction, learning from somebody like Mike Beers, becomes optimal in that situation? Or are there more, or are there multiple ways to win?
Yeah, so DraftKings is basically just exactly like the FanBall Classic, where we have a ton of data, like 330,000 drafts. It's just you throw out defenses, which FanBall has, and you add 2 more rounds. So what I would be doing is I'd be drafting more wide receivers. So in FanBall, you start 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 flex, 1 defense, and then 11 bench players. DraftKings, again, the same thing, except no defense, 2 extra rounds. And so what's optimal for FanBall is 2 to 3 quarterbacks, drafting exactly 2 to 3 quarterbacks, 5 to 6 running backs, 7 to 8 wide receivers, 2 to 3 tight ends, and 2 to 3 team defenses. So throw out the defense. I'd probably draft maybe 1 extra running back, couple extra wide receivers. And it also matters where you're drafting these guys. Like late round quarterbacks tend not to hit, late round tight ends tend not to hit. But we've seen time and time again, drafting late round running backs like let's say a James Robinson or a late round wide receiver can really go a long way towards improving your win rate expectation. In a DraftKings, especially where you get the scoring bonuses, you have to go that way. If you're drafting early, it really pays to draft rookies right now. Your best win rate expectation is going to be in August. That's when the fish come out to play, like guys who have no idea what they're doing. They're drafting quarterbacks in the first round. So your best win rate is going to be August, unless you're really you've really studied the incoming class of rookies. You know where guys are going to be drafted. You know who has the most potential, the most upside. We have that at our site. Greg Gassell, Wes Huber can help out there. But that really goes a long way. The teams that were drafting Odell Beckham Jr. in the 16th round when he was a rookie, or Kareem Hunt in the 15th round when he was a rookie, or even Justin Jefferson and Brandon Ayuk in the double-digit rounds before the NFL draft last year, those guys, they absolutely crushed. And then if you're playing in DraftKings, if you're doing the tournament, like the top-heavy millionaire maker tournament, then you really want to pay attention to stacking, maximizing your upside as much as possible, paying attention to ownership too. Like James Robinson was never being drafted, and hey, who knows? Maybe he's the starting running back for the Jaguars if Leonard Fournette gets hurt or anything like that. But yeah, if you started him, you had a massive leg up on everyone else. It's tough. It's tricky because there's so many different best ball formats. There's Superflex, which changes things up. There's underdog, which, only 12 rounds in some cases, 3-man drafts. So you really have to know the specific league and sort of tailor your strategy around it. Definitely moving towards DraftKings or the tournament style on DraftKings can change things quite a bit.
So, Scott, to piggyback off of that, you mentioned stacking. So we have wide range of listeners, people that are listening for the first time. They're hearing about BestBall for the first time, to people that obviously are really, really into this. Can you explain specifically as it relates to BestBall what you mean by stacking for people that might not be familiar and why it's such a good idea at DraftKings?
So stacking is basically pairing your quarterback with either is wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, the tight end 1. And it's just a way of getting raising your upside. So like a good example last year was, drafting Kyler Murray plus DeAndre Hopkins, or like imagine if Dak Prescott didn't get hurt and you drafted Dak plus Amari plus CeeDee Lamb. Like you were just, head and shoulders ahead of everyone else, or, Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen, who had a massively depressed price tag all offseason. And I have the numbers. I just don't have it pulled up in a document right now. But yeah, I think the biggest, the best stack you could do was like a wide receiver 1 plus wide receiver 3 plus QB stack, or a wide receiver 1 plus wide receiver 2 QB stack. And yeah, tight end too, especially if it's a touchdown dependent tight end. But yeah, it's just a way of maximizing your edge. I found it's not as important as drafting the right positions, and specifically drafting the right positions in the right rounds. But it is another, edge you could just add to our tool belt to give us a better chance of beating all of our opponents.
Scott, you just mentioned drafting the right positions in the right rounds. I have been of the mind, now my personal successes in BestBall, and this is purely anecdotal, I've had more success in BestBall when I kind of go running back heavy early and I load up on those number 2 and number 3 wide receivers from their own teams who can have those random pop-off weeks. I know that you tend to disagree with that. You think zero RB is very much viable in BestBall. So what are, in general, if you're telling somebody, all right, you've done a handful of BestBall drafts, now it's time to get an edge playing BestBall, here's the way to start to optimize your strategy. What rounds are you taking guys in?
Yeah, so before we go there, I'd actually like to first talk about like the types of players that are more valuable in BestBall. And that is highly volatile, sort of boom or bust type players who have a high weekly ceiling are far more valuable in BestBall than a start sit league. High weekly ceiling doesn't really matter at all in start sit. Week to week consistency matters a lot. Like you want to know when you're able to start a specific player. Like T.Y. Hilton was like you almost would have had a negative win rate if you drafted T.Y. Hilton in start sit. But in BestBall, he was like, he barely hurt you, which seems shocking. And the reason for that, beyond just like not scoring enough production to meet his ADP requirements, was that when he was started in over 50% of his leagues, he averaged just 6.1 fantasy points per game. But in his 6 least started weeks, he scored 23 fantasy points, 21 fantasy points, 16 fantasy points. So he was really volatile, and he was nearly impossible to predict week to week. But in a BestBall league, the computer just automatically starts your highest scoring players. So you got all of the benefit of his boom games without any of the negatives of his bust games, like hurting you, which definitely happened in a start sit league. And then just to talk about high weekly ceiling, Larry Fitzgerald was cheaper than Alan Lazard, outscored Alan Lazard, but Alan Lazard had a much higher win rate in BestBall. And the reason for that was just because, Larry Fitzgerald never scored over 14 fantasy points. And, Lazard at least beat that twice. So what are the chances of a 14 fantasy points from your wide receiver actually start going into your starting lineup? I don't know that it's, probably like maybe 50%, something like that. But like Allen Lazard's 26 fantasy points, 100%. So he's definitely, high weekly ceiling, important. Week to week consistency kills you, or week to week inconsistency kills you in start sit. But in best ball, it doesn't really matter at all. So like J.D. McKissic and Nyheim Hines were two of the biggest, best ball league winners this year. Did he help you at all in start sit? No, not really, because you never knew when to draft them. That's why my strategy in start sit is bell cow or bust. I really want running backs I know I can just plug in every single week. They're not going to be game script dependent, where a J.D. McKissic and Nyheim Hines are. All right, Washington wins. It's, J.D. McKissic's not really involved. The other running backs are scoring touchdowns on the ground. But if they're trailing, J.D. McKissic is getting peppered with targets. He's putting up, high scores that are getting slid into it's just easier to make up the ground. Those guys had like an ADP of round 15, whereas, and combined to put up, I think it was RB4 production on a fantasy point per game basis, just taking, the higher score of the two each week, where you'd have to just pay exorbitant prices for those guys. So yeah, boomer bust type guys, but because of that, it's much easier to, get replacement value at the running back position. So running back, the data really shows, just sticking with FanBall here, that the optimum strategy is definitely get a running back in the first round. The highest scoring running backs are your league winners. But then for the next, round 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you really want 4 wide receivers. You can go, the quantity over quality approach, like that can be a successful approach. But the data really shows, probably 4 wide receivers in the first 6 rounds. And if I'm in a DraftKings tournament, I'm definitely doing that, maximizing upside, hoping you just nail the right late round running back. I feel like I just talked for a while. We could talk quarterback strategy, tight end strategy too.
Well, so I did have one question, Scott. And I was going to say to piggyback off what you just said, but I'm pretty sure I've already used piggyback twice. So probably because I have daughters and they ask me to give them a piggyback all the time. But I need to come up with what are other good dovetail? What do they say? Mm-hmm. What are the other ones they say, Joe? You're a wordsmith. To pick up where someone else left off. That's one, I guess.
The coattails, piggyback. See, you put me on a spot with these Ross. I'll come up with a word out of nowhere, but yeah, I don't know.
Ask your professor wife. To build on that. I will say this. Speaking of having a tough time coming up with the right word, I don't know why anybody isn't putting $1 on DraftKings Sportsbook this week on any college basketball team, so you can win $100 if they make a single 3. I mean, look, wow. There's plenty of teams that make a lot of 3s. You know who they are. Put $1 on them and then win $100. It's that easy. Just make sure you use the code Ross wherever you are. Get the DraftKings Sportsbook app on your phone. Throw the code Ross in so you get that offer. Terms and conditions apply. You guys know the deal there, but I love deals like this. By the way, DraftKings has paid out over $7 billion since 2012 to their customers. All right, here's my question, Scott. You're really big on the data and the roster construction, all those things, right? You said running back first round, wide receivers, 4 wide receivers through the 6th round. My question is, how do you balance the data that you know versus like, okay, I know I should take 4 receivers, but I love that I could get this tight end here, or I love that I could get this running back here. How do you balance that when you're going through a draft? Or do you just say, look, this is what the data says, your best chance to win, I'm taking a guy at this position no matter what, because this is where you win. I'm curious about that sort of give and take.
Yeah, I think it's just important knowing those numbers. So like Aaron H., what he's going to do is he knows all this stuff intuitively. He doesn't have to look at the numbers. He's just done so many drafts. He knows the answers. But what he's going to do is he's just going to, the first 6 rounds, he's just going to, draft whoever he wants to draft, but then sort of tailor the roster construction around that, which is exactly what you should be doing. Yes, 4 wide receivers in the first 6 rounds, a running back in the first round has a great, and then like ignoring wide receiver for like 5 rounds. That's really like one of the strategies with one of the best win rates. But things are obviously going to change. Like, okay, what happens if, David Montgomery falls, 3 rounds and you already have 2 running backs? Yeah, well, why not take the third? You just can't pass up that value. And so it's just having these different strategies, keeping them in your tool belt to see what happens. How does this specific draft break down? And then, mixing things up, changing things, adjusting to that on the fly. There's no one set way that you're going to win your draft. But it's just important to know these things. And another example is, so what I just outlined is like one of the best strategies, but like the best strategy over the past 4 years is just drafting the tight end 1, only drafting 2 tight ends the entire draft, and then drafting 3 quarterbacks, 3 defenses, 5 running backs, and 8 wide receivers, whatever it is. But it's just like, it's been such a massive edge drafting the number 1 tight end, like really realistically just Travis Kelce, because first of all, the position is so top heavy. Last year, if you combined only the best weeks from Noah Fant, TJ Hawkinson, Hunter Henry, Travis Kelce on his own outscored all of those guys by a margin at way less draft capital. All right, you took him in the first, you took him in the second, but he just, and then you draft like a random 18th round tight end to cover for the bye week, or really just to cover for the bye week. Maybe he'll have a boom game and he goes into your flex spot. The win rate on that is massive. And just the benefit also from drafting him is like, you don't have to draft a 3rd tight end. So that goes to like another upside wide receiver or something like that. That's been one of the best strategies. But guess what? Once Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and Darren Waller are off the board, then 3 tight end becomes the optimum strategy, and waiting until like the 8th round to draft your first tight end becomes the ideal strategy. So it's just like everything, there is no perfect strategy in a vacuum, but as the draft unfolds, it's important to know these different things. And again, maximizing a bunch of different edges can yield to really good odds of being a profitable basketball player.
Scott, what about handcuffing running backs? Plus EV, minus EV, neutral?
Yeah, that's minus EV. That's, sort of like an insurance policy. We don't want to be worried about minimizing risk. We want to be worried about maximizing upside. Remember, you're trying to finish first out of 12 teams. So don't treat it like a DFS GPP, but yeah, that's minus EV. Don't worry about that.
And you had hinted at it earlier, Scott. This is the last one for me. Quarterbacks. When you think the right time is to draft quarterbacks, typically in best ball drafts?
Yeah, so you want to draft them early. So in start sit, late round QB is king. It's been like, my recommended strategy for a number of years. But in best ball, quarterback is so much more valuable. For one thing, you don't have the benefit of streaming. Like, you could stream together QB 6 level production, just grabbing guys who are free agents and have like a really soft matchup, or you'll hit on a Justin Herbert in like week 4 and just ride him out through the remainder of the season. You don't have that benefit. And there's also, more scarcity. So there's, in a 1 QB league, only 16 quarterbacks going to be drafted, but in a best ball league, probably 30, 35 quarterbacks are going to be drafted. And realistically right now, how many quarterbacks can we say we know for a fact are going to be week 1 starters? And maybe only 25. So the scarcity is an issue. So it really does make sense to probably grab 2 by round 11 is what I would say.
How many drafts do you do a year, Scott? And when do you typically start really going heavy?
This year I'm probably going to be well over 100. When do I've done that probably 2 other times in the past 3 years. When do I start going heavy? I love drafting right now. And like I said, it's like a mock draft where you can win money. So it gives you a leg up on your opponents who might be hibernating throughout the off season. You're really staying on top of everything. You know what's happening. Guys are falling up and down. Here's why. So it can give you a leg up for, your high stakes leagues or your friends and family league. I really do like to start drafting right now. Plus, being friends with Wes Huber, reading Greg Cassell's player capsules, talking with Danny Kelly, I feel like I have a really good leg up on the rookies. So that gives me another massive edge. Remember, that is a massive edge when you're drafting in February and March.
So 2 things everybody needs to do. Number 1, you got to go to fantasypoints.com. Use the code FEAST when you sign up. They have an army of dudes like Scott and Joe. It's unbelievable. I mean, I don't remember all their names. There's Hanson, of course, and Adam Kaplan's there, and Tom Brawley and Graham Barfield, Greg Cosell. They even got more dudes than that. I mean, you guys got to be the biggest fantasy shop out there that I'm aware of. I know this. The best bang for the buck by far.
I will endorse. We're not the biggest. We just think we're the best, and we also think the best bang for your buck for sure.
Correct. Fantasypoints.com. Use the code FEAST. Check out Scott on Twitter as well, at Scott Barrett DFB. If for nothing else, then to see what I think is a picture of Scott playing pool with a Matt Jones t-shirt on in his avatar on Twitter. Is that photoshopped or real? Either way, it's amazing, Scott.
Yeah, it's real, custom-made shirt. That was my original Twitter avatar for years, and then people were like, all right, we need to see your face. I'm like, I can't get rid of Matt Jones, so he's coming with me on the t-shirt.
That is amazing. At Scott Barrett DFB. He's at FG_Dolan. I am at RossTucker NFL. Check out the other shows, like we said. Next week, we will move onward and upward. I have no idea what we're going to talk about. But the good news is we got a week to figure it out. Maybe it's Dynasty. Maybe it's Best Ball 301. Or maybe we can all find out where Scott lives and get all that data he has on his computer, because I didn't know any of that stuff, and I need that stuff. I'm guessing it's at fantasypoints.com. That was amazing. I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Feast podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and the College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, RossTucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.